measure return of your stock and portfolio. So if you have a choice to invest in one stock, okay, the one stock, and so what is the criterion and how you choose one stock based based on the risk and return. So what we measure the return is called expected return. So the expected return is the mean of the probability distribution of possible return. So it looks like, oh, you feel still confusing. So what is expected return? And so typically we talk about the saying is that we have, okay, this is the return. And we have okay, we have risk, right? This is the return, and this is the, okay, we have the risk. This is the return. So there is going to be a relationship between the return and the risk. So what is the relationship? The relationship, okay, is going to be a positive relation. The higher the risk, the higher the return. Okay, that's the relation between the risk and return. So like that. Okay. So we have a higher risk and a higher return. Right? The higher the risk and return. So based on the risk and return, we can classify our financial asset in different categories. So for example, you have you save money, you have money you saved in your account, right? So you have account. So you have, let's say you invest in your saving account. Okay, you have a saving account. Okay, that is pretty low risk. So the risk is low, almost no risk. However, the return is very low, right? You low return. And then you go, maybe you have, you wanted to do is you invest in stock. Okay, the stock will give you a higher return and a higher risk. So different type of financial asset. So between the saving account and stock, you have a bond. The bond give you lower level risk and lower return. And maybe you do options and futures, financial derivatives that give you much higher risk and higher return. So when you calculate return, so that's you compute the weighted average of the possible return. That's expected return is going to be your possible value of return during this period of time times the probability of the value occurring during that time period. Okay, so we need to do is that, so you have the expected return. Okay, so let's say you open an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, so we make this one and bigger. Okay, the expected return is the sum of the value times the probability. So that's the return. So we might use a picture, maybe it looks better, so we can have this formula to the Excel spreadsheet. Okay, and then we'll change. Okay, so you have the expected return equal to the probability times the value of that okay, the value occurs under that possible probability. So let's say we have a expected return for a company is called Zomwatt. Okay, Zomwatt. The Zomwatt Corporation's stock, and they have different economic situation. So the state of economy, you have a different type. Okay, for economic downturn might be 10%, and of opportunity that's going to be economic downturn. And then your investment, your stock is going to be negative 5%, you lose 5%. If a zero growth is normal, and that could occur 20%, so your stock return is 5%. The moderate growth, your stock return is 10%, and your high economic growth, so your economic return is going to be 20%. So what will be your expected return? Okay, so you can do is that you're using this the probability of that return, and then you sum them up. Okay, so you have different scenario. 2, 3, right? 0.4. So let's see. Okay. This is 0.4. 3. Okay, whenever you have any question while I'm doing my work, so you can interrupt me and let me know. Okay, so you have different scenarios. Okay, so we have different scenarios. This is your probability. And this is your stock return. So I would like to suggest you to use Excel. Okay, this is very convenient. Calculate expected return. And so this is the state of economy. Okay, the economic downturn, they go down, and zero growth. Okay, no growth, and moderate growth. And this is a high growth. Okay, so what will be the expected return? Expected return you can do is that you're using the probability times the return. Okay, this is going to be the probability times your return. Okay, so what you do is you just using the probability, this one, times your return. Okay, and then the following, when you apply the same formula, you can just move your cursor to the right-hand side corner.
Bring it down.
Yeah, drag it down. Okay, you drag it down. Okay, the cursor has to be like a solid cross. Okay, become, you see, is this one is not a solid cross? Okay, this, you cannot move that one. Okay, it has to be like a solid, like a cross in that corner. And then you hold it and drag all the way down. They apply the same formula. Okay, that's gonna be your expected return. Your expected return is going to be your sum. Okay, you see this sigma sign is a sum. That's your expected return. Okay, you sum all this product. So that's your expected return. You click on enter. So your expected return is 0.105. So you change it to percent. It's 10.5%, right? 10.5%. That's your expected return. Any questions? You have another way to do that, okay? So there is another one we call the function is called sum product. Okay, in Excel you can use sum product function, and you select this probability and comma, and then you select all those return. Okay, that give you the expected return. So it's going to be the same. Okay, and we call this as expected return. Okay, your expected return is 10.5%. Okay, so we already know the return based on different scenarios. So next step we're gonna talk about is how to measure risk. Okay, the risk we're using the standard deviation of that return. So how you do that? Basically, this is a okay. So the risk is called a standard deviation, which is this the delta we have. Standard deviation measures the dispersion of returns. It's the square root of the variance. It's the square root of the variance. So let's have this formula here. Okay, so we have the square root of the variance. Okay, so I put this formula right here. Okay, this the formula on the top is applied to how to get the expected return. Okay, this is a Greek letter is called moon, which is the mean. Okay, the mean in statistics we call this the mean. Okay, the mean, and this is for the risk called standard deviation is called the standard deviation. Okay, so the standard deviation is a measure for risk, and the mean is a measure for expected return. Okay, so now we see we have, this is the expected return, which is this part, okay, the moon. And now we have the value, which is the return. Okay, return, you see in this formula, this is V, we use this one, and the probability, letter P. Okay, so we can do is this is the probability times the value. Okay, so now using this one, okay, the return minus the expected return. So we have this part is called deviation. Okay, deviation minus, and then you square that. Okay, so we call this one, okay, this part, okay, it's a deviation squared. So we have the deviation, and where is that? Okay, this is your return minus, this is the mean. Okay, we choose this one. Okay, you put $, because this number you don't want to fix it. You don't want that one change. So put $, to fix this number. And then you close parentheses and a square. Okay, so square that. Okay, this is the return minus your expected return squared. So we call this one, they do have a name. This is called the value minus expected return, is called the deviation. So this is the deviation squared. And then you move your cursor to the right hand side corner, and then you drag all the way down. Okay, this gives you the deviation squared. Okay, so you have the deviation squared. And okay, next step, did you see this is the probability? Okay, so you have use that probability. It is going to be the probability times times the deviation squared. Okay, this number we already calculate, and then we just using the probability times the deviation squared. Deviation squared, and then you click on enter. So you have the probability times the deviation squared. Okay, so now you can see this part is already calculated. The sigma is, that means you sum them up. You sum them up. Sum of those probability times the squared deviation. Okay. So now you already have this part. Okay. So, and because we're gonna take the square root, now this part is called variance. So we have the name for this. Okay, the variance, this is what you calculate, is called variance. We have the variance. Okay. Now you need is the standard deviation. So what is your standard deviation? Standard deviation is the square root SQRT The square root of the variance. Okay, square root of the variance is your, this is your standard deviation. Okay, that's your standard deviation. So you have the standard deviation. The standard deviation, which is your to measure the risk. Okay, to measure the risk. So we can change it to percent. Change it to percent. Okay, the 7.57%. Now you go back to see as the standard deviation 7.567%. We have the variance. Okay, the variance is 0.005725. Right? So that's how you get the variance and how you get the standard deviation. Okay, so we already know how to calculate or measure the risk. Okay, so the decision is going to be if they have two stocks, they have the same level of return, and you choose the stock with lower standard deviation. And the standard deviation, that means the risk. And if you have the same level of risk, you choose the stock with a higher and expected return. Okay, if the two stocks, their return and standard deviation are different, so you have a coefficient of variation. Okay, you have a coefficient of variation. So the coefficient of variation is called the CV. What is coefficient of variation? Coefficient of variation is the standard deviation divided by expected return. So this is the you don't have to just skip to decimals. Okay, that is the coefficient of variation. So when you have individual stock, so the decision is that you choose the stock with lower coefficient of variation. Okay, that's our conclusion. Our conclusion is going to be lower coefficient of variation. Okay, so choose a stock in isolation that choose only one stock. You choose the one with lower coefficient of variation. Okay, any questions? Okay, so we go, and this is how you do the risk and return. So the stock, because we invest in stock, so typically there are different kind of risk. And the first type of risk is called firm-specific risk. Another type of risk is market-related. So the market-related risk is due to the overall market condition. And so we can do is to minimize, okay, the firm-specific risk through portfolio diversification. So you just invest in one stock, you will face two types of risk. Okay, firm-specific risk and market-related risk. But if you do portfolio diversification, So you invest in more than one stock, okay? So more likely you can significantly reduce your firm-specific risk. And as the total number of stock increases in your portfolio, okay, as you increase to about 20 stocks, so the firm-specific risk reduced to almost zero. But however, you see the pink area, this is the market risk. So you cannot reduce the market risk. So market-related risk is still there. So it is constant. Okay, the great benefit is for portfolio diversification is you can reduce firm-specific risk. So that's what we talk about, and is called do not put all your eggs in one basket. Okay, so the risk and return. So you can do is using another this is another proxy is called beta. So the beta is also a measure of the stock risk, okay, relative to the general market. So the market risk, how you measure this, the risk of your stock. Okay, you have a proxy for the market, and also you have the index of the stock. So you can measure the market risk of your own stock is using, we call it beta. Okay, so what is the beta? Beta is the slope, okay, which is the slope of your stock relative to the return of the general market. So the general market index, we usually choose SP 500. For example, Pepsi. So you can see the slope, okay, is 1.1, okay, which is we can show in that is this when the market return increase 1%, Pepsi will increase 1.1%. Okay, so we have another rather than this coefficient of variation, and we can use beta to measure the stock. Okay, beta measures the risk of your stock relative to the general market. Okay. So with the general market, so we're using market return because you don't know what a general market is, and we typically use SP 500 index. Okay, the SP 500 index. So the beta, if the beta is greater than 1, okay, so your stock is called aggressive. Okay, aggressive stock. And if your beta is less than 1, it is conservative. Okay, you have a conservative stock. So basically, we can consider your stock in two different groups: aggressive stock or conservative stock. So the conservative stock is when the market increase and return increase 10%, and your stock will increase less than 10%. When the market price drop down more than 10%, and your stock will be drop down less than 10%. So it's greater than 1, that means it's more volatile. Okay, less than 1, less volatile. Okay, any questions? Okay, so we learned the risk and return and how to calculate risk and return today. So we're gonna take a break after about 5 minutes. So we come back. So we start next session about capital budgeting. Okay, see you in about 5 minutes later.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay.